15 Biggest Jerks in the Golden Age of Hollywood. You won't believe who's on the list. Step back into the Golden Age of Hollywood, a world of dazzling lights, timeless glamour, and legendary stars who seemed larger than life. But behind the glitz and glossy magazine covers lurked another reality. Many of these icons, adored on screen, were infamous off it for their egos, fiery tempers, and shockingly bad behavior. In today's countdown, we're pulling back the velvet curtain to reveal the 15 biggest jerks of old Hollywood. And trust me, you'll be stunned at some of the names that made this notorious list. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn wasn't just a star, he was the swashbuckling symbol of Hollywood's golden age. With films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, he became the dashing hero audiences adored. But the man behind the sword and charm was far darker. Off-screen, Flynn lived like a storm, wild parties, endless affairs, and nights drowned in alcohol. He carried a reputation for arrogance and recklessness, often cruel to those working beneath him. Many crew members remembered him not as a leading man, but as a bully who thrived on chaos. And yet, his smoldering good looks and irresistible charisma kept fans loyal, while the studios carefully shielded his image. Behind the curtain, though, Errol Flynn stood as one of Hollywood's most difficult and most controversial legends. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford wasn't just a star, she was a force of nature. One of the most glamorous and commanding actresses of Hollywood's golden age, her career stretched across decades and earned her an Oscar for Mildred Pierce. On screen, she embodied elegance and power. But behind that polished facade was a woman with a far darker reputation. Crawford was known to be cold, calculating, and nearly impossible to work with. On set, she demanded control, often clashing with directors and co-stars, unwilling to compromise her vision. To many, she seemed manipulative, obsessed with protecting her image no matter the cost. Her most infamous legacy came not from the screen but from the pages of her adopted daughter Christina's explosive memoir, Mommy Dearest. The book accused Crawford of emotional and physical abuse, painting a chilling portrait of a mother who demanded perfection and punished failure with cruelty. While some questioned the truth of those claims, the story forever reshaped the way the world saw her. To the public, she was Hollywood royalty. But to those who knew her best, Joan Crawford wasn't just a diva, she was a nightmare behind the scenes. Cary Grant. Cary Grant. To the world, he was the epitome of elegance, the charming, effortlessly stylish leading man of Hollywood's golden age. With unforgettable turns in North by Northwest and Bringing Up Baby, he embodied sophistication like no one else. But behind the polished smile and debonair persona was a man far more complicated. Insiders often found Grant difficult, even impossible, to please. He was notoriously controlling about his on-screen image, obsessing over every detail. A sharp tongue was his weapon of choice, and those he didn't respect, whether co-stars, directors, or crew, were quickly dismissed as insignificant. His perfectionism, while admired, came at a cost. Impatience flared into mood swings, leaving sets tense and colleagues uneasy. To many, his professionalism was undeniable, but his ego cast a long shadow, often stifling collaboration. Some described him as cold, calculating, and consumed with control. And so, while Cary Grant enchanted audiences as the ultimate gentleman on screen, those who worked with him knew another side, one of Hollywood's most demanding and, at times, most difficult legends. Mae West. Mae West wasn't just a star, she was a force of nature in early Hollywood. Bold, razor-witted, and fearless, she shattered taboos with every sharp one-liner and every unapologetic display of sensuality, making herself a box-office powerhouse of the 1930s. But behind the diamonds and sass was a woman who demanded nothing less than total control. West rewrote scripts, overruled directors, and reshaped productions so everything revolved around her. Criticism. She had no tolerance for it. Challenge her authority, and you were out the door. Some admired her confidence, even calling her a pioneer in a man's world. But others saw arrogance bordering on tyranny. Co-stars complained of being pushed into the shadows, reduced to little more than set dressing to showcase her brilliance. Hollywood couldn't deny her genius for comedy, yet her iron grip on power made her one of the most polarizing figures in the industry. Mae West wasn't just a woman breaking boundaries. She was a boss who didn't care who got trampled on her climb to the top. John Wayne. John Wayne. Known to millions as the Duke, he was the towering embodiment of rugged American masculinity. With unforgettable performances in classics like True Grit and The Searchers, Wayne became the ultimate symbol of frontier grit and patriotic valor. But behind the legend was a man as polarizing as he was powerful. Wayne's blunt demeanor and unshakable ego often put him at odds with directors, co-stars, and anyone unwilling to bend to his will. His outspoken political views, fiercely conservative and laced with controversial remarks about race and American history, sparked outrage both inside and outside of Hollywood. Colleagues described him as a bully on set, dismissive of younger actors and fiercely protective of his spotlight. He had a habit of demanding script changes to ensure he dominated every scene, regardless of story or character balance. To his fans, Wayne was larger than life, a screen presence unmatched. But to many who worked with him, he was less a collaborator than a storm, relentless, unyielding, and impossible to ignore. John Wayne wasn't just a Hollywood star, he was a force of nature who carved his legacy by sheer will, no matter who got swept aside. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich was the very embodiment of glamour, mystery, and elegance in Hollywood's golden age. With her husky voice, razor-sharp wit, and daring androgynous style, she shattered boundaries and mesmerized audiences around the globe. But behind the dazzling facade was a woman infamous for her vanity, control, and impossible standards. Dietrich managed her image with military precision, dictating the lighting, costumes, and even how her co-stars were framed beside her. To many directors and actors, she was arrogant and dismissive, quick to belittle anyone who failed to meet her expectations. She demanded absolute creative control, and when challenged, she would simply walk off the set without hesitation. Her talent was undeniable, but her perfectionism and need for dominance often made her a tyrant on set. For those who worked with her, collaborating with Marlene Dietrich was never a partnership. It was complete submission to her rules, or the risk of facing her wrath. Bette Davis. Bette Davis wasn't just an actress, she was a force of nature. With unforgettable performances in All About Eve and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, she cemented her place as one of Hollywood's most iconic talents. But Davis's legend didn't stop at the screen. Off-camera, she was just as famous for her fiery temper, razor-sharp tongue, and legendary feuds, none more infamous than her war with Joan Crawford. Fiercely independent, she refused to bow to studio bosses, directors, or co-stars. She demanded excellence and had little patience for anyone she deemed unprofessional or unprepared. To some, her boldness was inspiring, the mark of a woman unafraid to break Hollywood's rules. To others, it was arrogance, even hostility. Crew members often described her as intimidating, and actors who couldn't match her intensity were quickly dismissed. Love her or fear her, there was no denying it. Bette Davis was brilliance wrapped in fire. Bold, uncompromising, and unforgettable. Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr wasn't just another pretty face in Hollywood. She was the face, a dazzling vision who lit up the screen in films like Algiers and Samson and Delilah. But behind the glamour and allure was a mind just as extraordinary. Lamarr was more than a movie star. She was a brilliant inventor whose ideas would lay the groundwork for modern Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Yet, for all her genius and beauty, Hedy carried a reputation that was far from flattering. On set, she could be cold, aloof, and notoriously difficult to work with. Co-stars and crew members often described her as dismissive, treating those around her as if they were beneath her. Patience was never her virtue. If someone didn't meet her impossibly high standards, she made sure they knew it. Her perfectionism and need for control frequently sparked clashes with directors, creating an air of tension wherever she worked. In the end, Lamarr's brilliance and breathtaking presence made her unforgettable, but her icy, superior attitude cemented her place as one of Hollywood's most demanding and difficult stars. Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes. More than just a billionaire, Hughes was a legend, an aviation pioneer, Hollywood powerhouse, and the force behind blockbusters like Hell's Angels and The Outlaw. But his brilliance carried a dark shadow. Hughes was infamous for his iron grip on every production, obsessing over the smallest details, from casting to costumes. Actresses were often at the mercy of his whims, young women plucked from obscurity, groomed for stardom, and then discarded once he lost interest. His perfectionism stalled films with endless reshoots and delays, driving directors, writers, and actors to the edge of madness. And as the years went by, Hughes himself began to unravel. Paranoia consumed him. He vanished for months at a time, locking himself away in hotel suites while multimillion-dollar productions ground to a halt. Those who worked under him often described the experience as suffocating, even demeaning. Yes, Hughes was a genius in aviation and film, but behind the curtain of glamour and innovation stood a man whose power crushed the very people he employed. On set, Howard Hughes turned dreams into nightmares, and few dared to speak out against him. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn is remembered today as one of the greatest actresses in the history of cinema. Fierce, intelligent, and unforgettable in films like The Philadelphia Story and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But at the height of her career, Hepburn wasn't simply admired, she was also feared. She earned a reputation as one of the most stubborn, outspoken, and difficult women in Hollywood. Hepburn refused to bend to the studio system. She challenged directors, tore apart scripts she didn't believe in, and dismissed the demands of studio executives without hesitation. To many, her bluntness felt like arrogance, and she made no attempt to charm the press or play the submissive female roles expected of women at the time. On set, she often dominated conversations, clashed with co-stars, and overruled creative choices, leaving colleagues either in awe or in frustration. Some admired her unshakable confidence, while others found her cold and condescending. In the end, Hepburn's legacy is iconic not only for her brilliance on screen, but for her refusal to compromise, an attitude that earned her as many enemies in Hollywood as it did admirers. Lana Turner. Lana Turner was the very definition of Hollywood glamour in the 1940s and 50s, a screen siren whose beauty and dramatic performances made her an icon. Discovered as a teenager, she skyrocketed to stardom with films like The Postman Always Rings Twice. But as dazzling as her on-screen presence was, her off-screen reputation often burned even brighter, and not always in her favor. Turner became infamous in Hollywood for her diva-like behavior. She was known to unleash tantrums on set, demand special treatment, and treat studio staff with open disdain. Crew members described her as moody, temperamental, and nearly impossible to please, often derailing production with her impatience for criticism or delay. Her personal life only fueled the fire. Scandals, torrid affairs, and the infamous murder case involving her daughter kept her name splashed across headlines. Directors often found themselves walking on eggshells, catering to her ego just to keep projects on track. Lana Turner's star power was undeniable, but behind the glamour, she was a force both mesmerizing and maddening, an intoxicating mix of allure and volatility that made her as difficult to manage as she was impossible to ignore. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart is remembered as one of the greatest legends of Hollywood's golden age. With that gravelly voice, steely gaze, and an aura of effortless cool, he defined the hard-boiled American male in classics like Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, and The Big Sleep. On screen, he was sharp, decisive, and untouchable. But off-camera, Bogart was a far more complicated man. Behind the tough guy persona, he could be impatient, sarcastic, and openly combative. Co-stars, directors, even studio executives often felt the sting of his sharp tongue. If Bogart thought a script was weak or an actor unworthy, he made his disdain known, loudly. His heavy drinking only fueled the tension, sometimes sparking unpredictable outbursts on set. His marriage to actress Mayo Method was a stormy battleground of arguments and reconciliations, feeding the tabloids and cementing his reputation as a man who thrived on conflict. Yet, for all his stubbornness and volatility, Bogart's honesty and refusal to play the Hollywood game made him magnetic. Some saw him as principled, others as impossible, but no one could deny his talent. Even when his moods threatened to derail a production, his performances were unforgettable, etched with a raw authenticity no one else could match. In the end, Humphrey Bogart was more than a star. He was a paradox, difficult, defiant, and endlessly captivating.